Hello, it's time for Combat Patrol Carnage. So here we are back with issue 16 and it's lore time. So we've got 2 pages of lore plus a short story. So we look at the Ultramarines and what makes them stand out from, well, all the other Space Marine chapters. We also have the continuation of Sergeant Askerton's story, and we look at Leviathan, the largest and most numerous of the High Fleets. So yeah, some nice information for us to read. But before we hit the table, don't forget to, of course, do all the usual, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop me a comment down below. I love hearing back from everybody, and it goes a great way to help the channel get noticed as well. So, yeah, leave me a comment down below. I haven't got a topic today, but just let me know what your hobbies are doing. Finally then, Combat Patrol Carnage is proudly sponsored by warbay.shop, your one-stop supply for all your hobby needs. They have a great selection of new and used models for various different armies and game systems. They also stock your hobby supplies and gaming aids as well. They also have a backlog of previous Partworks magazines and are even stockists of the new Combat Patrol magazine. So if you want some extras, check the link in the video description and you might be able to pick some up. Right, it's time to read, so let's head to the table and do some. So here we are then, back with issue 16. We've got our updated models here who will go off to the side ready for our big battle. Our 2 new paints then that can head off to my paint drawer so they can be used for future combat patrols as we get them. We'll probably be using Mephisto Red quite a lot when it comes to the Eldari in about 4 to 5 issues time. So let's continue with issue 16 and we'll hit the lore and read articles. So we've got all about the Ultramarines, all about Leviathan, and Askertons' story continues. So we'll adjust the camera and dive straight on in. So in we go, move the broken off pages out of the way, and we have our first lore article focusing on the Ultramarines. Ultramarines. The Ultramarines are paragons of war. Each is not just a physically mighty warrior, but a scholar of tactics and strategy capable of formulating a plan for any scenario. Every bolt, shell, and pummeling fist is placed with strategic precision. The Ultramarines combine the superhuman strengths of the Space Marines with the methodical and scholarly approach to war. Their most sacred text is the Codex Astartes, a vast tactical manual written by their Primarch. It is filled with guidance for any situation a battle may throw at a Space Marine. Even as fighting rages around them, Ultramarines remain calm and watchful, formulating brilliant and unusual strategies for victory as they hammer through their foe. This mental acuity does not only make the Ultramarines great warriors, but great leaders too. Almost uniquely among the Space Marines, the Ultramarines possess an empire within the Imperium, the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Compared to the hellish nightmare of most Imperial worlds, these planets are bastions of culture and learning, as well as vital recruiting grounds for the Ultramarines' ceaseless war effort. The Ultramarines are highly respected among other Space Marine chapters. They are most often found at the heart of a war zone, coordinating campaigns with other Imperial forces. The Ultramarines are seen by many in the Imperium as an example of the very best a Space Marine can be. Here we see the Ultramarines chapter badge, the Ultra U, and we see an Intercessor warrior there, a rather veteran looking one who's got gold around his knees there, so pretty obvious he's a sergeant and has seen quite a bit of combat. Although he has got the red head of a sergeant, he's just got a skull emblem, so usually a sign of a captain or a lieutenant, someone high ranking anyway. Rabute Guilliman, wielding the Emperor's own sword, leads his Ultramarines to battle. So seeing here, during the Plague Wars, Guilliman, a lieutenant, a sergeant, and an Ultramarine warrior fighting off against the Death Guard of Mortarion. Courage, honor, duty, these are our principles. Any who oppose them must be annihilated. Glory and despair. Recent years have seen the Ultramarines face their greatest trials yet, but there is hope. For millennia, the Primarch Rabute Guilliman, the godlike leader of the Ultramarines, lay mortally wounded on Macragge. Now he has returned to lead his sons. Guilliman's incredible intellect was tested to its limit when the 500 worlds were invaded by a horde of Death Guard. Traitorous Space Marines who have thrown their lot in with the Chaos God of Nurgle. Guilliman has used this opportunity to update the Codex Astartes and devise new strategies to cope with the rising horrors in the 41st millennium. But even as they drive the Plague Marines from the homeworlds, Guilliman and the Ultramarines are faced with protecting not just their own holdings, but the entire Imperium. As Guilliman battles both Xenos threats and political rivals, the Ultramarines race across the Imperium to battle the Tyranids. The Ultramarines regard knowledge as a vital weapon in their endless wars. You see a Librarius skull with the Ultramarines in the in an iron halo on a textbook. I believe this is actually personal heraldry for Chief Librarian Tigurius, who we will be seeing soon. Moving along, we have the continuation of Sergeant Askerton's story with Bonds of Honor, Part 4. That's enough rest for now, my boys. Follow me and we'll enter the gates of Colossus. See how its walls rise up above you? I'll wager you never even imagined that walls could get this tall. When I first saw them, I wondered how rock could ever be stacked so high without crumbling under its own weight. None of the many horrors I have seen would ever be able to breach such a wall. In its shadow, our order is preserved from harm. See the tower that rises even higher. In each of those, a brother keeps watch at all times. You are in their sights right now, and were I not with you, you would have been blasted to the afterlife long before you ever neared this place. But a wall is the least of the wonders that you will see once you have entered the citadel. Just as we have learned to craft rock into new materials that exceed what nature can manage, so too have we learned to craft flesh and bone into new forms that are mightier than anything that you will have found before. You will learn that only too well before long, as you begin the long transformation into one of my brothers. Now, I don't think I'll draw the story of Sergeant Askerton to a close before we reach the gates, but perhaps I can tell you a bit more as we walk. Last I spoke of it, they were in a tunnel, were they not? Ah, that's right, and Brother Mectras had just fired into the darkness. Well, with that shot, a flash of light went out from his bolt rifle. The propellant from the bolt lit the tunnel with a brief glow as it shot forward. And when the bolt exploded, well, truth be told, the light from that eruption was mostly stifled by the body of the Tyranid that it had embedded itself into. In that brief moment of searing light, the brothers saw what they were facing. The tunnel was broad enough to walk down two abreast, perhaps even large enough to get a small vehicle down. The walls stretched around and overhead, forming an almost perfect circular tunnel, as tall as it was broad. But this was no feat of engineering, as we would understand it. The walls were made of some strange biomatter that seemed to move. Mectras, who had fired the round, thought he must have been mistaken. Walls don't move. After all, the flash had only lasted a fraction of a second. It must have been a trick of the light, or the result of concentrating too hard in a place too unfamiliar. Another of the brothers let loose a bolt, and ahead another Tyranid fell. But this time there was no mistaking it. 1,000 pairs of eyes glittered in the sudden glow, for the tunnel was lined with lesser Tyranids, not just upon the floor, next to the bodies of their 2 slain comrades, but stretching up the walls and clinging effortlessly overhead. As one, the brothers let loose a volley of fire, sending out a halo of bolts to the sides and overhead. The squad moved so much in concert that even in the confusion and dark, they could fire past and between each other, never once hitting their brethren. The floor of the tunnel seemed to writhe and move, so great was the number of rippers that carpeted its surface. Around them, Tyranids fell so thickly that the brothers could not discern which were falling in their death throes and which were flinging themselves ravenously down to attack. At the front of the group, facing the oncoming tide, stood Sergeant Askerton, his pistol flashing as he fired round after round into the oncoming horde. Now, lit by many flashes from the Space Marines' weapons, one of the Tyranids reached Askerton, and he gripped it almost effortlessly, and hurled it to the ground, where it was crushed under his ceramite boot. But those who had fought by him before, as these brothers had, knew that the sergeant would seem totally dauntless by the end. And Mektras, who was the closest to him, saw that the sergeant now stood more defensively, and in the gap at his elbow, a bundle of broken wires trailed from his armour. The other brothers drew in tighter, the better to defend themselves from the crushing horde, but the Tyranids pressed in closer, scrabbling over their dead and their living fellows to get closer to the Space Marines. Sergeant Askerton turned and shouted over his shoulder to his brothers, "We cannot best them!" And as he called, his fingers curled around a grenade from his belt. He rolled it almost lovingly into the teeming mass in front of him, and the battle brothers dropped down low. The grenade disappeared into the swarm, and a second later its roar echoed down the tunnel. The Tyranids were so numerous that they were barely lessened by the blast, and the brothers started to move back the way they had come. Some of the brothers blasted behind them at the Tyranids they were retreating from, trying to keep them back. Meanwhile, others blasted away at their new path, for many of the Tyranids had gone past them on the walls and roof of the tunnel, and now stood between them and the exit. The deafening sound of the Space Marines' weapons echoed down the corridor. Once again. But this time, something was different. The Tyranids were thinning, but faster than they should be. Faster even than the brothers were firing. Moments later, they were gone, and the brothers were left in the dark. Sergeant Askerton strode through the rest of the brothers to lead the way back out, but the brothers could tell he was unsettled. No doubt many of them hoped that it was his dismay at having to leave a fight unfinished and a foe undefeated, but many of them privately worried that there was more to his unease. Many of the brothers could almost see movement at the edge of their sight, and almost hear something, right on the edge of hearing. Signs so faint that they were easy to dismiss as nothing but over-vigilance, or a product of the nervous energy of battle. But if the sergeant heard it too, then it would surely be real, for he was far too wise and stolid to become excited over nothing. Closest to the sergeant, Brother Mektras heard a telltale skittering and rustling that was becoming all too familiar to his ears. The sergeant must have heard it too, for he whipped around and fired his pistol down the tunnel. Standing in perfect silence as he surveyed behind him, the flash lit nothing but the tunnel walls, and the round struck the bare roof, sending down a shower of rock and earth onto the empty floor. Then, as they moved off, the noise came again, closer and bolder than before. Something was hunting them. Ooh. Some sort of infiltrator beast was hiding at the bottom of the tunnel, and has just been disturbed. So interesting to see what the next chapter will entail. But first, we have some information to read about the Tyranids and Leviathan itself. Leviathan. Hive Fleet Leviathan is the largest hive fleet encountered by the Imperium so far. Having emerged all across the galaxy, Hive Fleet Leviathan has quickly established itself as a terrifying force, notable for the vice-like grip its leader beasts exert on their charges. Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan overwhelm an Imperial artillery position. Pretty cool. See quite a few of the big Tyranid beasties at the back there. The awesome Screamer Killer Carnifex. Some Rippers and Hormagaunts charging down Imperial Guard line. 2 heavy weapon teams. 3 of the smaller portable heavy weapon teams. These are the larger artillery positions, which we'll get later in the collection. Rogaldorn tank, a Lictor popping up behind, and a small squad of veteran guardsmen. Hive Fleet Leviathan is feared across the galaxy. Such is its vast size that its tendrils have been encountered all across the Imperium, each bringing ruin and despair to countless worlds. Even in spite of the setbacks suffered on Baal, Hive Fleet Leviathan remains active throughout the galaxy, and it poses a significant threat. Even by the standards of the Hive Fleet, Leviathan has proven to be incredibly adaptable, constantly changing its tactics. However, it is most notable for the strength of its synaptic networks. It seems that Leviathan is capable of pushing its lesser organisms to their physical limit, allowing them to fight even when they should be long dead. It knows everything about us, and desires only to consume us. Hive Fleet Leviathan's colossal scale makes it incredibly dangerous, and not only because of mere numbers. At every second, in almost every theatre of war in the galaxy, Leviathan is testing its forces. As one clutch of Barbgaunts attempt counterfire on the Tau, a pack of Von Rein's Leapers go claw to claw with mobs of orcs light years away. Every conflict is observed and recorded by the hive mind, which takes everything it learns and uses the information to enhance the swarm with new tactics and new adaptations. Often, commanders realize in horror that Hive Fleet Leviathan has already anticipated their strategy. One could study war for 1,000 years and not even come close to the tactical experience possessed by this Hive Fleet. Such knowledge is coordinated by the Hive Fleet's leader beasts, such as the Tyranid Primes and Psychophages. Those who attempt to slay these creatures to weaken Leviathan's advantage find them brutal combatants, often surrounded by guardian organisms far more effective than any conventional bodyguard. Leviathan's synaptic network is reinforced with multiple leaders. Taking down one is never enough. First among fleets. Hive Fleet Leviathan is one among an increasing number of hive fleets, but it remains the most significant of their number. Such is its size that the tendrils that spread from its mass are sometimes categorized as hive fleets in their own right. Nautilon and Promophore are 2 such fleets. Despite being separated by vast distances, it appears that the 2 fleets are attempting a pincer maneuver of incredible size. Their projected target is the Segmentum Solar and Terra itself. Warriors are synapse creatures commonly seen in Hive Fleet Leviathan's forces, acting as both coordinators and frontline troops. There we have it. That's our lore articles for issue 16. Up next we have our play articles, which we finally get to put our Psychophage to use. So I think, preparing for that, we'll bring in our Psychophage. So there we have it. Very nice, interesting lore articles, especially Leviathan being one of the most adaptable hive fleets out there. Really showing the menace of that alien race. And yeah, we're going to definitely find them an interesting opponent on the tabletop. Let me know which of the Hive fleets is your personal favourite. In the next couple of issues, I believe we do look at some of the other Hive fleets, which would be quite nice. As I've mentioned before, my personal favourite is Hive Fleet Kraken. The bone, flesh, and the red carapace is really nice and striking, and easily my personal favourite. But yeah, there we have it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and will join me for the next one. So until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on more Combat Patrol Carnage. Goodbye.